Welcome back to another haircut tutorial, guys, and within this one I'm going to be focusing on salon efficiency. So what to cut, what not to cut, what to do, what not to do. And the client had already said himself he was quite happy with the length on top, and on the sides he just wants a refresh. But we can see in some areas there is a lot of weight, in other areas the length is quite okay. For example, here at the back of the crown. So moving forward with this haircut, I am not going to be wetting the top at all, because this is an area the client is enjoying. I agree, it looks great. So I'm going to be starting off by graduating the sides, separating the hair from the back to the front and then from the sides to the top, working with the natural growth pattern of the crown to start my sectioning off. And then as I move towards the front, I'm just going to lift up the fringe just to see where my section needs to end, and then pushing with my thumb attached to the comb towards the front to separate off the sides. And then putting a clip just to take away that hair to keep it nice and clean. Same onto the other side, just lifting up the hair to see where I need to separate the sides off, grooming down and then adding in a clip. Going to be starting off with the back. So as you've seen in other videos, I'm going to be working with that section to the back of the ear to start with the backwards graduation at the back before moving on to the forward graduation on the sides. So finding the occipital bone, number one, knowing that I want to take away all the weight below. So everything below the occipital bone, I'm going to elevate. Everything above, I'm going to over direct down. So starting with my first section on the base, knowing that this will be a skin fade, I need to take that really short in order so I can clean away all that unnecessary bulk, working with my fingers flat on the base. Moving towards the occipital bone at the back, really tight with my fingers. And now we can see the head is starting to round. So I'm going to over direct my second section down towards my first section. So grooming down, back towards my first, checking the guide, and then making my incision, making sure that I'm grooming the head directly from the root on the horizontal panel. So I have a nice round shape horizontally, but vertically I will of course have that triangular graduated shape. As I come back towards the occipital bone, my fingers are going to come nice and tight to the head to ensure that I have as short as length possible. Moving up towards my third section, grooming down towards the previous, towards the second, checking for the guide and making my cut. And you can see that the section wraps around the head. So every hair is getting pulled on the horizontal panel directly round from the root. But as I come towards the back, once again, my knuckles are going to be flat on the root to ensure that I take the hair as short as possible. Fourth section, you can see the hair is reactive, so I'm going to flip to the wide to side of the comb, watching the root, and that is going to show me what I need to do. Remember, the length around the crown was not an issue. So here there is minimal length to cut, and that is okay. That is what I am trying to show you guys. Not every hair needs to be cut for it to be a perfect haircut. But now as we're back around the occipital bone and the reaction is low, I'm back to my fine tooth side of the comb to make sure that I have even tension throughout, working with my knuckles coming tight to the head. Moving on to the other side, once again working in the same motion. Fingers start flat on the head. This is going to be removing all that weight in preparation for the clipper work, taking everything nice and short, connecting guide to guide, because as it's cross graduation, I'm going to have a crossover from what I cut on the first side to what I am now cutting. Second section, grooming down to the first, making sure that I have that over direction, so I am building up that triangular shape on the vertical panel, working round to the back of the head with my fingertips this time touching, making sure that everything is nice and short below the occipital bone. Third section, grooming under, bringing that cut hair up into the uncut hair, grooming down to the previous, to the second section, checking for the guide, making my cut, making sure my fingers stay in that triangular angle. Moving back towards the occipital bone, as I come closer, my fingers come closer, making sure that I am taking things nice and short. I'm now back on an area of reactivity, so I'm going to flip to the wide tooth side of the comb to make sure that I am predicting that reactivity for when the hair is going to dry, so it's not taking too short. But as the hair goes back to a normal tension, I'm going to go back to the fine tooth side of the comb. Moving on to the sides, I'm going to be working with that forward graduation, and it's not going to be working directly above the ear because that will come off with the clippers. So it's going to be above, so visualizing where my clippers are going to run up to, pulling my fingers out in that triangle angle, and then working with my knuckles flat on the base because this is where my clippers are going to flow into. Everything towards the front, coming nice and short. Second section, I'm going to groom under first to bring that cut hair up into the uncut hair, and then I'm going to groom down, over directing to the previous section. I want to build up a nice shape on the curvature of the head here, so I'm grooming down to start to build that triangular shape. That weight is incredibly important with this haircut. As you see with the final image, it's going to have a nice strong structure. Moving towards the front, fingers come flat on the base as this is area where I will be using the shape up. Grooming down to the previous section for section number 3, I'm going to be working with that triangular angle with my fingers once again, ensuring that I have that nice build-up of weight and shape as the head is starting to round. Even more important here because the head is really starting to round towards the top, and working with my fingers flat on the base, still over directing down, but flat on the base on the horizontal panel. Onto the other side, you can see that guide from the back, which I have already cut. Going to work towards that and with my fingers flat on the base to make sure that everything is nice and short for this first section. Second section, grooming down to over direct to the previous, but making sure first I groom under, bring that cut hair up into the uncut hair, also add some elevation. Now grooming down to the previous, fingers come out in that triangle angle, and then cut only to the second knuckle, and then finish that section off, moving towards the front, everything nice and tight. Guys, it's all about the vision. I know I'm going to use the clipper there, so I know I need to take it short. Grooming down with this third and final section to the second, checking for the guide, making sure we have a guide, because if there's no guide, we don't cut, because then we will have an imbalance. Finishing off this section, grooming down to the previous, and making sure that I finish off this section with my fingertips nice and tight to the head. I'm going to connect the sides into the top, some diagonal sections, pulling my fingers out in a triangle angle and using point cutting to make sure I have a textured finish. This triangular angle you see that I'm grooming in is so important to make sure we do not take away that corner we have built up with the graduation. As I come to the front, just over directing down to build up more weight and preserve the length. Onto the other side, the same again, grooming out in that triangle shape as you can see, point cutting to connect the top into the sides. This triangle angle is going to save us cutting a round shape, guys. So ensure that if you are connecting, you are grooming the hair out in the sufficient manner. Now, coming towards the front, I just want to connect the sides into that front length because there was a little bit of hair around the front that was just a bit too heavy and baggy, which is giving a separation, showing the receding hairline. So bringing that down with some over direction and point cutting, connecting into the sides will create some nice strength. Now I'm just going to touch up the front part of the haircut. So using my fingers as a clamp onto the base, I'm going to point cut that length in the middle. This is just going to give it a nice soft finish, but creating a bit more strength as we come along the front. And then I'm going to move onto the top and work with some deep textured point cutting. You can see that I'm angling the scissors at a nice angle to make sure I have some good indentation, just to recreate that curly hair effect that he already has. Moving towards the front, working on the middle part of the head, as the shape of the haircut was quite round before, so reducing this weight in the middle is just going to square it up as it sits on top of the graduation. Now working with some slicing at the very front of the haircut, this is just going to remove any of those flyaway hairs which are just removing that strength along the front. Now just positioning everything into a nice place before I use the diffuser to dry everything nicely. I've added a little bit of curl cream just to make sure that there is hydration for the curls, and you can see that that texture I used with the point cutting is coming out nice and clear. this front shape is already so much stronger, and that is due to just touching up those small details. So it's not always about layering everything, going around everything. The fine details, the small details make the biggest difference. Moving on to the fade, I'm going to start with a number 3 with the guard closed. I'm working up into that graduated weight line, confidently making sure that I have an even surface to cover, fading along from the back to the front. As I come up towards that graduated weight line, I'm going to lift the clipper off the head. So I'm not flicking away, but I'm lifting up into the scissor work. That's going to ensure that I have a smooth transition throughout. And in areas that are denser, I'm going to move slower with the clipper just to make sure that I have an even cut throughout the haircut. Because as you are going to see throughout the fading process, this hair is not the easiest. There's a lot of light and dark next to each other. The hair is actually quite sparse, but very thick at the same time. So ensuring that we take our time in the right areas is essential to make sure that not only the end result looks clean, to keep the process moving smoothly. Here you can see that I am lifting the clipper off of the head and brushing the teeth into the longer hair. This is a great way to connect the clipper length with the scissor length. It's almost like using the thinning scissors or scissor over comb just to make sure we have a nice transition from the short to the long. Moving on to the skin line, I'm going to be doing a very low skin fade. So the skin line is going to go from the temple area and not above the ear, but through the ear, because above the ear will not leave me with enough space to blend and keep that low fade. So I'm going to be following that shape, dropping down below the occipital bone at the back of the head. So once again, you can see on the other sides, I'm going through the ear, not over the ear, and I'm just going to connect into that hairline. So the fade is going to be flicking into the hairline above the ear. As I drop to the back, I'm going to be working with that rounded shape below the occipital bone, and then we can connect the two in the middle as I worked from one side to the other. I have a nice even area to blend with throughout. Now working with the shaver in circular motions to ensure I have a nice soft finish, not creating any harsh lines before starting with the transition guard open, driving the clipper up into the lengths that I cut before, and once again working with a bit more attention on the areas that are darker because the hair is growing in different directions, there's different densities involved, so each process I need to make sure that I am very militant with it so I do not skip and cut the corners, because those corners are just going to cause me problems later. Moving down to the number 1 guard with the lever open, I'm going to be working that up into that transition guard, focusing on keeping that nice dark weight line moving into the graduation. That is going to ensure I have a nice structure throughout this fade. And as I am coming along towards the back of the head, there's also some bumps and indentations in the head. So I'm going to be working in different motions, moving the clipper around to suit the part of the head. And you can see here already that nice structure is being built up at the top of the fade, and I'm slowly introducing more light to the fade as I work down. So making sure that I'm constantly grooming the hair forward, as that's the way that the hair is going to be styled, before I am going to move down a number 1 guard with the lever closed, lifting that up into the number 1 open. But as you can see, there is still a lot of inconsistency with the fade, as those areas that are a lot darker, whether that's due to the skin, the head, the hair texture, I'm going to be working with the corners throughout. So this is a fade example where I'm jumping between the different lengths, working with the corners just to be very visual, because some areas come up a lot lighter than others. Now moving down to the 0 open, I'm going to lift up into the number 1 guard. So I'm working in this descending motion from the longest guard to the shortest to keep the fade low and slowly introduce light to the fade. And these areas along the head, which I'm going to identify in a second, I need to work with the corners because there are some strong bumps and indentations, as you can see here. So it's essential I get up in there with the corners to remove the excess dark points within the fade, because guys, this fade is not easy, so therefore I need to be working very visually throughout to remove any of those extra dark spots. Now just cleaning up the last parts of the fade, working very specific with the corners in certain areas and very light with the clipper, as you can see here, lifting off of the head, just making sure that I am removing any of the dark spots and not creating any lines. Now going to shape up the front part of the fade. I'm working down first because the hair is very soft. So if I worked up first, it was going to move the hair. So working down was just to cut and create the shape, and then moving up is going to just solidify the strength. Now working on the vertical panel just to create that nice contrast between the C and that vertical panel. And now finishing off with some thinning scissors because there are areas of this fade I just needed to lighten up. Onto the other side, same process applies. Working with the transition guard with the lever open first up into the longer lengths which I had cut previously, before moving down to the number 1 guard with the lever open and lifting that up into the transition guard. Working in all directions, making sure that I am focusing on how the hair is growing, because in some areas it grows back, in some areas it grows forward, so I'm being very specific with each area before moving down to the 1 guard closed and then the 0 open, lifting up into each of the previous lengths I am using. Some fades like this take a little bit extra time, just going over the same areas over and over again to make sure that there is consistency. But if we stick within our methods, working with that descending motion, for example, on this haircut, we are going to get a consistent outcome. It may just take a couple minutes extra. Moving on to the shape up, once again, I started down first, creating the shape, and now moving up with a C motion, and then finishing off the shape with that vertical panel. Moving on to the back part of the haircut, I'm simply connecting the two. And the back part of this model, he has some very strong growth patterns. So I'm going to be working with more of a rubbing motion with the clipper in different angles, making sure that I get the corner into the dents of the hair, working with the 1 open first. Then I'm going to be moving down to the 1 guard closed before taking the guard off, working with no guard lever open, and then working with the lever closed to remove that bottom line. Some finishing touches on the fade with the thinning scissors, just working quite deep into the roots on those really dark areas before lifting the hair and adding some texture on top. Because guys, when we are lifting the hair, we are removing the weight that sits on top of the weight line. And guys, unfortunately the camera battery was about to die, but I got my finishing touches with the razor blade and the haircut was looking crisp. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. We will see you in the next one.